Hey everyone, it's Types, and today I'm doing a top 10 decks in the Pokemon TCG list. I haven't done this in quite a while, and honestly, I wasn't exactly sure how to make this list, as I think there are a bunch of decks that are pretty good right now, and the top decks aren't super clear, but there are a bunch of really, really solid decks, and there are four honorable mentions on this list as well. The honorable mentions aren't really in any particular order. If you want to say change the order of like the regular list by like one or two spots, I think I could see that. As I said, it's not a super clear best deck and like second, third, whatever. I don't think there's tiers. Some formats there are like tiers and very clear tiers of decks. Right now, I think there's arguments to be made for a lot of different decks, including a deck that is I like very new. I mean, the cards are relatively new, but it's a deck that is a new one that's been getting a lot of buzz recently, which is a really cool deck as well. But anyways, let's just get right into it with the first honorable mention in Roaring Moon EX. There are a bunch of like turbo basic decks on in the metagame right now, and Roaring Moon EX is certainly a solid deck like that. Roaring Moon EX's attack having to knock itself out is, that's not really great. Or not knock yourself out, but yourself super low to the point where you can just get knocked out by some single prizer or like all sorts of things. So that's not great. But you do have the new Koraidon. I think Roaring Moon EX is a pretty good deck. It was a deck I was playing a decent amount at a time. I I don't play a ton of turbo decks, so I was making some mistakes, but I realized that the deck was very strong, but not like insane. It's definitely a deck with a certain amount of limitations if your opponent is, because you really need to be taking knockouts with Calamity Storm, right? If you have to frenzy gouging all the time, that's bad. So if they are able to withstand attacks from Calamity Storm, or they're like attacking with single prizes, I mean ultimately, like a lot of the, I guess, like turbo big basic decks on this list, there is a limited amount of potential within the deck for like different attacking options. You have the Koraidon and the Roaring Moon, which are solid, the baby Roaring Moon, and the Roaring Moon EX as well, which is obviously really good, but ultimately there's only so much you can do. You might be reliant on flipping heads with Pokemon Catcher, which, is not reliable, and also you need to kind of hit things the right way, but it's still a pretty solid deck. Then we have Gholdengo EX next. I think some people think Gholdengo EX is like really good with the new A-Spec Energy Search Pro, searching your deck for any number of basic energies of different types, putting them into your hand, which can be up to 8, and you'll be looking to get that off with. You're probably not getting 8, but you're getting a lot with Energy Search Pro with all these different types, which is solid. You are hurting yourself a little bit by playing these other types of energies, but it's not that big of a deal. But ultimately, Gholdengo is just not like super great of a Pokemon. I mean, it's a good Pokemon. It can one shot also. It can one shot everything, and also it's just a stage one. It's not a stage two, taking up that amount of resources, and also it's a deck that is, it's a stage one, sort of higher HP than a basic. It's a pretty solid Pokemon. You have some versatility with Origin Form, Palkia V-Star. It's a solid deck, but it's not like amazing. Ultimately, it's not really like the other turbo decks, but it kind of is in the fact that we don't talk about Serial GX here as well, but Serial GX is a pretty similar deck to Gholdengo EX, where you need to just kind of go push and take knockouts on the active, maybe get a little bit of gust to take knockouts on the bench or something, but really you're just trying to knock out whatever's in the active, and you have limitations. You have Radiant Greninja to maybe go for a snipe attack at some point, which is solid, and you have some options, but ultimately both of these decks are limited upside. Serial GX is, of course, a newer deck. It's one of, if not the only, new decks on this list. And they're new cards. I mean, we looked at Koraidon and Roaring Moon EX, but ultimately Serial GX is the best new deck, and it's solid. The other new decks are okay. They're solid. There's, a good chunk that are pretty decent, and there are some very important new cards as well. But anyways, these decks both have some amount of limited upside. You could play Briar and Serial GX, and we have the Palkia V-Star package in here as well. So you have some solid stuff here, but ultimately you also are tying yourself down to a certain A-Spec to be able to hit as much damage as you want. So the Stage 1 EXs haven't been good for a while. These two are the best of them, but ultimately you're either looking for the really high upside of a Stage 2 or the speed, power, and I guess consistency of a basic. The basics aren't actually that consistent because of the way that they're designed, because they're usually 3 energies or a bunch of energies, but still, they're solid decks. They're definitely good, but they're not the best because of their lack of upside and various different areas, which we'll talk about. Then we have the last deck of the honorable mentions, which is Pidgeot Control. Honestly, I just don't know enough about this deck. I'd love to be able to say this deck is amazing. I haven't really played against it much. I've played it with a little bit, and I found it kind of awkward to use. Obviously, I'm grading these decks based on how good they are when you can play them well, not necessarily perfectly. If a deck is really hard to play, it will get knocked down a little bit, but not that much. But ultimately, this is a deck that is solid, but it's slow. Like, it's not necessarily doing a ton against all the top decks. You're kind of need to get things going the right way, and that's always how Control has been with these very toolboxy style decks, where the poster of like the Pokemon that's the forefront of the deck is like an engine Pokemon. You got like Pidgeot EX, which is generally called Pidgeot Control. Then you also have a Rotom V, which is a very important card for the deck, and those obviously aren't really doing anything in their own right in terms of controlling. So you just have those there as the Pokemon, which are to some extent kind of slow as well. So your opponent might just be able to outspeed you. There's something like Pekron EX in the game with Roaring Moon, so Gust trapping isn't going to be, you're not going to be able to do that, but you can Gust trap things with Latias. Decks that are playing Latias. Actually, you can Gust trap Latias EX itself, most likely. So there are some really cool things you can do with this deck. I don't know if Gust trapping Latias EX is necessarily a cool thing, but like really unique and powerful things that you can do with this deck, but ultimately you do have consistency issues and won't necessarily do what you need all the time or even that often, but definitely a solid deck here. I was really considering putting it in the top 10. I think this was the deck I was most considering, but also, um, I just don't. I haven't seen it do anything insane. It has limitations, and I played with a few different control decks in this format. For a while I wasn't playing that much, but the control, but now I've been playing a little more, and it is solid. But you're obviously stretching yourself in all the normal control stuff that is keeping it out of the best decks in the game, but it's still solid. Then number 10 here is Raging Bull Ogerpon. This is a deck that, I mean, it's pretty much the same thing as Roaring Moon EX in a lot of ways. Raging Bull EX is strong. You're reliant on Professor Sad's Vitality. Briar is a supporter that is theoretically really good, but you'll struggle to get value out of it in a deck like this because your main attacker isn't a Terra. You could get value, and you will try to, but it's not something like where you can get value out of it in Charge EX or something like that. So you're ultimately, in the late game, you kind of struggle. You need Pokestop, which you might not have, or Pheasant EX, which you'll probably have, and you got like Radiant Engine. You can try to get the stuff that you want, but you won't necessarily get it. You have gusting issues where we just see one boss. The boss is something that you can only like sometimes play. And then you have Catcher, which is inconsistent, and Pokemon Catcher, which is inconsistent due to coin flips, and Prime Catcher, which you only play one copy of because you can only play one copy of it. And you can also, I don't know. I mean, it's like a big basic deck, pretty linear. You have the Slitherwing to kind of break things up, but I feel like Slitherwing is really mediocre. I've played Pikachu EX some, and I've played against Slitherwing, and I haven't found it like. I mean, it's bad for Pikachu EX, but still, I feel like it is what it is. You just kind of, I wouldn't play Slitherwing, but that's just me. And so you just have one main attacker. Slitherwing isn't a great attack for breaking things up. I do think Koraidon is a little bit better for that, but it's still a solid deck. It is a top 10 deck, but it's not a deck that's necessarily going to be super scary. Yes, it is like the biggest threat turn one going second, I suppose. I mean, like Roaring Maniacs can do like the same thing, or can like knock anything out as well. They're a little bit different, but they're similar, relying on Sadas and stuff like that. So it's a good deck. I mean, I've talked about this deck a lot on the channel, and it's okay, but it's not the best, not the worst. It's all right. Then we have Gardevoir here at number 9. Gardevoir is just a pretty solid deck. I want to see if I have the right number of decks. That'd be really embarrassing if I don't have 10 decks. I mean, I had the honorable mentions. Anyways, Gardevoir EX it's doing Gardevoir EX things. You kind of know what it's doing. This list plays these cards, some different cards here, but it's doing more or less what it's always done since rotation last year, or I guess the beginning of this year. So with the rotation, again, it'll change again, but Gardevoir EX is right now pretty solid, but nothing amazing. I mean, you're a slow deck, and you're really weak in terms of HP, and you play low copies of your attackers with limited Pokemon Search, and it's a good deck, right? It's a good deck, but it's not anything super amazing. If you're looking for a deck that's an evolution deck, a little bit slower, there are decks that can do more damage and take more prizes. You are a single prize deck, which is really good, but Godwood just isn't necessarily always doing what you're looking for it to do in terms of I don't know. It's just not a super strong deck. Right? It's a good deck in the metagame, but it's not one that is taking lots of extra prizes through Briar or through Spread. You have Snipe with Screamtail, but it's not like super. It's good Snipe, but it's not Spread. So ultimately things can go wrong. Lost Vacuumed. I've always said that, and Lost Vacuum's certainly a card being played right now. It's not like it's being played like all of a sudden lots of extra, but it's being played, and you can Monkey Door through Pikachu EX, which is cool, but definitely a deck that it's a solid deck. There's not too much to say about it. This is a deck that's been around the game for a while, and whatever your thoughts were at the time when it was first around, with Drifloon stuff, that's pretty much where it is now. Next, the other deck up that is very similar in a similar vein, I guess not the same exact boat, but a similar boat to the other ones, is Lugia V-Star. And Lugia V-Star, you got your Archeopses, you got your Chinchinos. I haven't really seen this deck that much. I've seen it some, and I haven't really played it. I'm not a Lugia player, but it's a deck that does what it does, and it does it well. And we see like the Water Pond with Legacy Energy, which is kind of cool. But ultimately, you're just here to do Lugia things, take a big knockout with Chinchino, take extra prize with Iron Hands, maybe a big knockout with Weird Year V or solid damage with Lugia V-Star, Blood Marsh, Luna EX, and maybe use Lumineon V's attack to get it out of play, and you have your Jacques and you have your Research and Carmen to get stuff in the discard. You know the drill. It's Lugia. There's a lot of decks on this list. Not a lot, but at like the lower end of this list, there's a bunch of decks that have been kind of the same for quite a while. We might have a few on the upper end, but I think they've been a bit more interesting. And we have Snorlax. Speaking of interesting, Snorlax is a solid deck here, coming in at number, I believe, 7. Yeah, I was just counting. So number 7 here. Snorlax is what it always is, I guess. I mean, there isn't a ton of Switch being played. There's some though, certainly, but you got Snorlax. You got some really good walls, and of course, some Fighting EX and Mimikyu. Again, this deck's been kind of the same for a little while now. Though the Fighting Ogre Pond, which is not a brand new addition by any means, but since that's been the game, it's been an amazing wall alongside Mimikyu. Megaton Blower is pretty solid of an ace spec to counter Lugia. I mean, that was often a pretty hard matchup in the past. Probably one of I used to play a bunch of Snorlax to grind the ladder because it was really good. The ladder's been in a weird spot lately with some of the changes they made to live, but and now I think you're like kind of less encouraged to play Snorlax, which is it's cool, but Snorlax is still pretty solid. People are playing Latias EX instead of switching some, so that's good for Snorlax. And yeah, it's Snorlax, right? What else is there to say about it? And then we have Trap Ghost Dusknoir cracking in here. Wait, no, this is here at number 6. I was going to say cracking the top 5. No, it's number 6 here. Trap Ghost Dusknoir, I kind of want to put it higher. I wasn't going too much off of statistics like win rate and stuff, but this deck it definitely has a lower one, but I think it's a really good deck. Trap Ghost EX with Dusknoir is really solid. Trap Ghost EX being able to hit, like a mid-range attack with 220 with Unified Beatdown, Double Turbo, and a full bench with Area Zero Underdepths, and Blood Marsh Luna doing like the same thing. And then you have a solid engine with Noctowl, Fan Rotom, which I guess is part of your engine, and Pidgeot EX, and of course, it's Tenacity to search Double Turbo in your stadium, and you can search your stadium and all your trainers with Noctowl and stuff. So you got a really solid deck built around, and then you have Dusknoir. Dusknoir works pretty well within the deck with the rare candies, having incentive to play lots of rare candies in the deck that isn't a stage 2 deck, first and foremost, so that's really good there, and you can use Counter or Catcher. I do think Counter Game will be a useful card in this deck in the future as well, but that's for another discussion. But Trap Ghost EX is a pretty strong attacker, and Dusknoir just allows you to finish stuff off. You can use Briar pretty well in a deck like this. You can use Gusting pretty well. You can use Thornton, a supporter like that. That's kind of cool. Featherball is okay. I don't think Featherball is that good in this deck, but it is all right. You might use it some. And ultimately, it's just a solid deck that is able to do really good damage with Dusknoir plus Trap Ghost EX to take big knockouts, and is pretty scary to go up against because they can take extra prizes with Dustor and Briar, and their attackers are basic, so it's lower maintenance than a lot of other things. The only issue with this deck, in my opinion, is hitting double turbo energy, and you can't necessarily take one shots without Dustor. Like, you're not really doing that, but whatever. It's not that big of a deal when your attackers are basic. And obviously, with this build, you're not getting any value out of Bouffalant or anything like that, but definitely a very solid deck. And then we have Charizard EX here coming in at number 5 with Dustor and with Pidgeot EX, and this deck's very similar to the Terrapagos EX. A lot of these decks have a lot of overlap. Right now, the metagame I think is okay, but there's a decent amount of overlap between the top decks. Like, you can group them into categories, as I've kind of been doing, but Charizard EX is a deck where once you're set up, you can hit this mid-range attack, which escalates to like a really high damage output attack, potentially one-shotting really almost anything in the game with Burning Darkness, and you have the Dusknoir stuff, and you have Briar and Counter Catcher. It feels like I just said this. You got Pidgeot EX as well. Pheasant EX, that's really in Terrapagos EX as well, and you get Rainy Charizard as well. Just a bunch of really solid cards here, and it's a very consistent deck, and it's a deck that just works very well. And it's one that I would recommend. I mean, it's an interesting deck in my opinion to play with and arguably to play against as well, where there are different routes and you need to kind of consider different things. It's a very like thoughtful deck, I guess. I don't know if that's a good way to describe it, but you do have rare candies as well. This is a deck, I said, Terrapagos EX, you're not a stage 2 deck, but you're playing 4 rare candies here. You obviously are a stage 2 deck, and so you need those 4 rare candies, and certain things could go bad. Like if you get Team Devolution, I guess that's bad, but that's not that common. And so ultimately, it's just a very solid deck. You got a bunch of HP as well. This is really the tanky deck in the game right now. There aren't, well, is it? It kind of is the tanky deck in the game right now. And you're not, hitting turn 1 attacks, but you're hitting turn 2 attacks, and you're hitting for big damage, and theoretically threatening to, knock out a bunch of different Pokemon as well. You could recover your Dusknoir, things like that. Anyways, coming in at number 4 here is Regidrago V-Star. Regidrago V-Star is a deck that is pretty good in the metagame right now because it just is. I mean, it's been for a little while with the TMI Psychopon EX, Dragapult EX. It's been good. They do Alolan Exeggutor EX. I've said that it's kind of whatever. It's another deck that hasn't really gotten too many new pieces. I guess Terra Orb is also new, which I guess is good for the deck. Which can get your Alolan Exeggutor EX. Yeah, no, it gets your Dragapult EX and your TMI Psychopon EX. It might be the only game that only deck in the game that really is getting multiple different Pokemon off of Terra Orb. I can't really think of any other ones that see play. I mean, I can't really actually think of any at all. I'm sure there are some. I'm sure there's a good few, but I can't really think of them right now. But this is really interesting to see a deck that can get good value off of that or solid value off of it. And I don't know, you got like Hiram with Cancer and Cologne, you got Hisuian V-Star, and you got Giratina V-Star. It's Regidrago. It's not a deck that's been like super dominant in the meta for super long. It's, kind of not been much of anything until really Dragapult came out, is when it became quite strong. With Teal Master Go EX as well. Wait, were those the same set? Those were the same set, weren't they? I thought they weren't for some reason. So they came out at the same time. And they allowed you to go ahead and power yourself up and hit for a solid spread damage. The spread damage is like solid in the game right now, though there are more big basic decks, so Dragapult EX isn't as powerful. Same with the Kyurem, right? You're not going to be taking these big multi-prize turns by knocking out a bunch of single prizes, which is, I mean, the prizes are really good, and then on top of that, limiting your opponent's pre-evolution basics is also really good. So ultimately, Regidrago V-Star losing out on that a little bit, but whatever, it's still really strong. You can use Giratina V-Star, you can use Dragapult EX, you can use Alolan Exeggutor EX to power yourself up to do some good stuff against big basic decks as well. So again, I've never been attacked by Alolan Exeggutor EX. I've said that. My point. No, I have. I had played against Alolan Exeggutor EX as a deck, but not been attacked by it with Regidrago V-Star. But it's doing what it's always been doing. Then you have the next deck up, which is Terrapagos EX Cloth. This deck I think is really good. I mean, I might be just riding the hype train, but this deck seemed really good when I played it. Precious Trolley seems like kind of bad. I mean, not completely terrible, but I think I only got like one game where I get good value out of it, maybe two. And I've played against this deck a lot as well. It's been, I think, the number one deck I've been seeing on the ladder right now, which is really interesting. This deck is really cool. If you don't know much about it, use Trapghost EX as an attacker, but turn one going second, you can't use it, but you can use Cloth. Cloth, I feel like a lot of people know Cloth as well. It is 170 with a double turbo, and but only if it's affected by a special condition. But you can use Brute Bonnet with Ancient Boost Energy Capsule to do that, and that's pretty easy to do. You need the tool, and you do have a Rangroovy actually to get tools if it's in the active, which is like kind of cool. Latias EX is really what's making this deck work, because you can send up a Rangroovy, and then you can use Latias EX to free retreat it as well. Oh, and this deck also plays Genesect, which is really cool. The list I have played has not, but it's a deck with just all sorts of extra tools. I mean, it's one of those decks where Arven is really good getting the tools. You have Forest Steel Stone, which is obviously really good. You have Ancient Boost Energy Capsule, which is obviously really good for, I mean, it's great for Brute Bonnet, and the Binding Mochi. Binding Mochi is really a card that I love in this deck. Binding Mochi is such a cool tool. Saying attacks used by the poison Pokemon, this card's attached to do 40 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. And with Trapghost EX is your strongest attack. You could use Blood Moon Ursaluna EX to do 20 more with Blood Moon, but that's not that common. Well, you will attack with it, but with Double Turbo a decent amount of the time as well. But anyway, we'll say you're hitting 220, but then you can use Binding Mochi, and all of a sudden you're hitting 260. There are no other energies. You're just playing double turbos, unsurprisingly. And originally I was like, what's the point of this deck? Aren't these just two double turbo energy attackers? But Cloth is a great single prizer. I've really said before that I love Koraidon as a Pokemon within various decks, and Cloth does very similar things. I mean, it just looks very similar to Colorless on the basic fighting Pokemon, and it's hitting very similar amounts of damage as well. But with Trapghost, which also Cloth hits a good weakness, one-shotting. That means one-shotting like Luminia V, not one-shotting Squawkabilly EX, unfortunately. Not without any form of damage buffs, but you'll be doing what you're doing 170. Yeah, it'll be just a little bit short, but not that short. And so you could use Binding Mochi or whatever to get the knockout, but with Trapghost EX, you're hitting 240 with the tool, and then you're also poisoning your opponent's active, and you can use Rainy Hisuian and Sneasler, so all of a sudden you're hitting 290, which is really good. You also have Hisuian Electro V to hit grass weakness. It's okay in the deck with super effective glasses. You can be one-shotting stuff, but that's a little bit awkward to pull off, but it's still solid. And as I said, Latias EX is really good. You also Peck Run. You could donk your opponents. I honestly think that this deck is part of the reason why you have single prize decks being a little bit worse in the metagame. Pekka can go, you turn one going first. If you get Pekka down, you get Radiant Hisuian Sneasler down, all of a sudden and then you poison them with Brute Bonnet, and all of a sudden, and Pekka needs to be in the active, all of a sudden you're just knocking out basics, turn one going first, which is insane. Like, almost no deck in the game can do that, but this deck can, which is solid. It's definitely a good option, and Pekka comes in as almost a single price attacker that's not even an attacker, doesn't use up your energies, which is nice. Hisuian Electro V also doesn't use up energies. Blood Moon Ursaluna EX doesn't necessarily do that, and you can often force your opponent into these odd price situations, so you can attack for free there, so overall, the deck's really solid. I was considering putting it number one, but I was like, it's not the best deck in the game. But it's really, really cool. It's really, really fun. You can break through Pikachu EX as well with whatever, because you got the poison as well. So it's a really, really cool deck, one I'd 100% recommend you try out. And I mean, it's really, really solid. Next up, we have Miraidon EX here at number 2. This is a deck I've played some. I am not a massive fan of it. I just have never been, but it's a very solid deck. You have Miraidon EX and Iron Hands EX, Raikou V, which has increased value with areas or under depths, with Pikachu EX. Pikachu EX is just way better than Mewtwo EX. Mewtwo EX was very actively a liability on the field, but Pikachu EX is something that helps you a little bit. I mean, it doesn't help you that much, but it could help you a little bit in certain situations. But really, you have Latias EX to smooth things out. Hopefully, you don't get, boss trapped with like something stopping you from retreating. But otherwise, you can Latias EX to get really good value out of different things. You have all the classic Miraidon stuff with Electric Generator, and apparently Irida is in this list. And then, which I don't know why Irida's in this list, to be honest, because Force Seal Stone's like really good, and Arven's like pretty good, and Water Pokemon aren't very good in this deck. You just have one you can even play and get value out of. On that turn, you play Irida, because Lumineon V will just save for next turn, which is still okay. But, anyways, Magneton and Magnemite are or not Magnemite, but like that's a new card. But Magnemite's searchable off of Rhydon, obviously, and then Magneton is it's really good. Knocking yourself out, accelerating a bunch of lightning energies, all of a sudden it's really good. You're just putting so many energies on the you're just powering up another attacker or knocking out taking a knockout with Raichu V, but probably just powering up another Iron Hands EX and streaming attacker is better. It's a deck that's always had issues late game, and I've really said that's an issue with a lot of big basic turbo-y decks, but with Fezandipiti EX that has helped these decks, but now you have Latias EX also helps some, but now you have Magneton, and that just is so good. The add prizes thing slash giving up one prize, it's not really an issue. I mean, normally forcing your opponent to odd prizes is good. Theoretically, they could hit you with something like Briar, Dustmore. We don't even see Radiant Greninja in this deck, but they could hit you with something like that, and then that's bad for you, but that's not that common if your opponent isn't really able to just kind of take control of things with like I don't know, maybe multiple Dustmores. There's some weird things that they have to do to make the Magneton something that is really. Well, I said two Dustmores. That's not the case. Like they'd be targeting your Iron Bundle or your Minio, which usually won't be in play. So ultimately, you're not really forcing yourself onto these awkward prizing. And then with Briar, that could be an issue, but hopefully that's not an issue, as you might be forcing yourself onto odd prizing as well, which is kind of weird and not necessarily something you want to do, but might be what you. There are just different things you can do with it. And ultimately, Rhydon just really solid, and it's a way more complete deck than it really ever has been. With Flaffy, it was arguably better, but there were some pretty serious issues where Flaffy, you just wouldn't necessarily get set up. You really needed multiple Flaffies, and then they get stuck in the active, and it was just a bit of an issue. So right now, you don't have those issues, and you're in a very good spot. This is the best Rhydon ever has been, and it really ever will be, I'm pretty sure. And it's not number one. Number one is a Lost Zone back on top. Lost Zone is really solid because of Pikachu EX. Yeah, Pikachu EX has been really good for Lost Zone. I was considering like hedging my bets, maybe putting Rhydon at number one, which also plays Pikachu EX, but doesn't attack with it. But now Pikachu EX is so good. This deck plays 5 different types of energies in this list, but Pikachu EX with Mirage Gate relatively easy to stream attacks, specifically in the late game. You don't get one-shotted really by that many things. Your opponent could do certain things to break through your ability, but they're not super common. There's like special conditions like burn or poison, and those are in the game. Specifically, you have poison with the cloth, and you have burn with the Slitherwing teched into the Regional Ogerpon deck. But I've said that before. Like the Slitherwing, I don't think is a great card. It's kind of awkward to use. Cloth's, the Cloth deck will be causing issues for this, but overall, Pikachu EX is really, really good. It one-shots pretty much everything. And then it doesn't one-shot everything, but ultimately Stage 2 decks of the game are kind of whatever. And you have Sableye and you have Radiant Greninja, so it's alright. And then you have just the Insane Attacker that's tanky, that's a basic, and this is really the best we see in Stellar Pokemon B, outside of maybe Trapgos EX, which is also in this deck, where you can get value out of Crown Opal and Unified Beatdown, and it's okay. Trapgos EX is an okay in the deck. I mean, if your opponent's playing Regional Ogerpon, you could just Crown Opal, and then they still can't do anything. They could, like, double Gust, or maybe single Gust, or something, but that's kind of awkward for them to do. And then you have Iron Thorns EX, and this is just Lost Zone being really good. We've seen Lost Zone good a lot of different times, and really threatening the top spot in the metagame, and now I think it's there. If we just look at the metagame itself, we can see that Lost Zone's the top deck. Charizard Pidgeot's up there, Regidrago, Miraidon, Ceruledge. Ultimately, Ceruledge is just like a new deck, and people are very familiar with Charizard and Regidrago, but Lost Zone's super good, and Miraidon's also very good. And there's some like you're just kind of random decks just chilling up here as well. All right, I consider Hydreigon kind of a random deck. It's not a great deck, It's a deck, But anyways, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts down below on the metagame with a lot of big basics in the game. Certainly, even if you don't completely agree, I'm sure you'll agree that big basics have been better than they have been recently because Trap Ghost EX is still very good. I guess played a little less than it was before. How much less has it actually been played? It's been played, I guess it's been played noticeably less so far, but it's 100% a deck that I think is legit both ways, with either Dusknoir or Cloth. Cloth is just a really fun deck. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed. Consider liking, subscribing, hitting the bell, joining the channel as well. You can check down below in next to my channel name and click the join button. That's something I'd appreciate. Don't feel any pressure to do so, but I'd love it if you do. But anyways, I hope you are excited for the next video as well, because I probably will be doing some more top 10 lists, but I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I'm excited to see you in the next video.